And good morning. How's everybody doing today? Welcome to Psychology 150. It is Thursday morning. Dr. Rosenberg coming to you from Western New York at the Chautauqua Institution. Hope everybody's doing well today. I'm booting up the class on my phone to see if we've got any chats going on. Hope everybody's doing well. It is Wednesday of week 7. Man, we are almost done. I don't know if you are as excited as me about finishing off this semester, but I am totally fired up. I see we have a couple of people on chat this morning. If you're on chat, go ahead and type in a hello and let us know you're there. It looks like we have a couple of people in chat this morning. How are you doing? I don't know who we've got, who our usual audience members are, but we'll see. It's great to see you. We're doing chapter 13 today. So we are going to be talking about the self and personality for the next couple of days. Good morning, Juliet. I got your email. I am sorry about the difficulty with your assignment this week. Just figure it out in the next couple of days. If you need any help, send me a text and we'll sort things out. But I'm sorry about the difficulty with your assignment this weekend. Cool. Oh, no problem. No problem. Always glad to help you out. I am so sorry it's been difficult for you. But we're going to get through this. I promise, Julia. I promise, okay? Now, we have a discussion board due this Thursday. For this discussion board, you're actually going to have to take a personality test. It should take you about 15 to 20 minutes to take the personality test, but just budget that into your discussion board time this week. So you're going to take the personality test. I've got a worksheet for you. You're going to write your scores out so you don't forget them. And then I want you to talk to the class about your personality and your particular scores. If you have them done tonight, when you have to talk a little bit of personality test scores tonight. Julia says she's neurotic. You know what the funny thing is, Julia? You are not alone because I score neurotic as well on that personality test. So it's not just you, Julia. There are a lot of us people out there who are anxious or overly emotional. So don't feel like the only one. Lewis, take the test and find out if you're a neurotic personality or not. Well, it looks like we have several people joining the broadcast right now. If you're on the chat board, go ahead and type in a hello and let me know how you're doing. I was just telling everybody we have a personality test to do with this week's discussion board, so give yourself a few extra minutes. Take the test, write your scores down on the worksheet that I gave you, and then tell the class about your personality style. We will be having webinar tonight at 7 o'clock. Everybody's invited. We're going to be talking about implicit attitudes and nice. Oh, hey, hello, Adrian. Thanks for coming today. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, personality. So, chapter 13, personality. What is personality and why are we interested in it? Let's describe personality as the relatively stable set of thoughts, emotional responses, and behaviors that characterize a person, specifically you. It is the quality that causes two people to respond differently to the same stimulus. Let's talk about this for just a minute. Personality, it's a relatively stable, so it's sort of set. It's a pattern, if you will, a habit that you have of thinking, responding emotionally, and behaving. It's a relatively stable set. It's your habit of thinking, feeling, and behaving. Whatever is unique about you, okay, it's the quality that causes you and I to respond to the same thing differently. That's what personality is. It's the quality that differentiates us, how you and I habitually respond to things in our environment. Now, a couple of neat things about fact. Did you know that personality is actually sort of still evolving even throughout your teens. Most clinical psychologists will not put too much weight in a personality score before around the age of 17 or 18. In fact, you cannot be diagnosed with a personality disorder until you are 18 because personality scores seem to fluctuate throughout youth. Now, this is kind of interesting because, as I told you a couple of weeks ago, IQ can be reliably measured at 4 years of age. But think about that. Your personality takes another 12 to 16 years to really settle in and form. And you folks now, as you're moving into your early 20s, me in my 50s, our personalities are pretty set and they are harder to change. Lewis took the test and wanted to know whether or not he needed to include his score sheet. No, you do not. You do not. The only reason I include the score sheet for you, Lewis, is because the report that you get is in the form from the actual test is in the form of a web page. If you click off of it, it disappears. If you accidentally hit the back button, your scores disappear. And it's 120 questions, so it takes a few minutes to answer. So what I do is I have this spreadsheet and I have students write it down as soon as they're done. And then you've got it in a separate document so you don't lose it. You can then save it and use it to refer back as you're doing the discussion board. I have had students in the past that will take the test and then accidentally open their Microsoft, might open their Blackboard browser on top of in the same page that they had their test scores, and their test scores are gone. So I just wanted to make it a little more permanent. Also, Lewis, what I find is a lot of students like to give the test to their friends, their family members, their mom or their dad, and you have a score sheet for them as well. So, and I do encourage you to have your friends and parents and family members take the test. It's a great journey of self-discovery. Juliet mentions being a neurotic person. Did you know I did not realize I was a neurotic personality until I was 35? I thought everybody else was the problem. And then I took this exact test when I was 35. When it first came online, I was looking for stuff for school, and I took this test. And when I finished the score, I realized it said that I was incredibly neurotic. I showed it to my wife, expecting her to laugh at how inaccurate this test was, but she told me it was the most accurate thing she'd ever seen. And that was the point in my life when I realized that all the arguments I gotten into were my fault rather than everybody else's, because I was a neurotic personality. So it's interesting to take the test. So personality, relatively stable set of thoughts, emotional responses, and behaviors that characterize a person. It's a quality that causes two people to respond differently to the same stimulus. It's your sum total of experiences, your beliefs, your genetic set point. All of this stuff interacts to give you this relatively stable way of responding to the environment. Why is personality important? Well, personality allows us to understand our behavior and the behavior of other people. It works as an interpretive tool. If you remember on Monday, I was talking about attributions, the reason we give to why things happen. Human beings love to understand why things happen. So attributions are a great part of our social world. Why did people do that? Well, knowing people's personality allows us to give attributions as to why people do the things they do. And they also help us explain why we like to do things. I'm going to go to this place and this place and this place because my personality fits these environments. I'm going to avoid this environment because I'm pretty sure that it doesn't fit my personality. It allows us to understand our behavior and the behavior of other people. And the other thing about personality is it allows us to predict the future behavior of others. So if I know that Juliet is a neurotic person that doesn't like loud noises and freaks out easily in a crowd, I'm not going to invite her to a concert with me, right? Instead, I might invite her to the library with me. So it's going to allow us to predict what people will do in the in the future. There are sort of three broad approaches. Oh my goodness. Three broad approaches to personality. Excuse me, another typo. I am king of the typo, folks. I'm sorry, along with being neurotic, I am a very sloppy person. So, three broad approaches to personality. Today, we're going to talk about defining the self. Exactly. Uh, uh, actually, okay, so we can talk about defining the self and try to describe uh, what people's self is. Okay, so what does a self look like? What are the parts that go into your sense of self? And how does this sense of self or sense of personality develop? What are the processes that cause it to develop? And then third, the reason why I wrote two and then added three, I was going to I divided defining the self out. Yes, you can define it and talk about what it is, but can you reliably measure it too? So probably you should put, the reason I had two broad approaches to personality is because in my mind, defining the self and reliably measuring it instead of just being one thing is actually two things in my opinion. So we're going to talk about these three different approaches to personality over the next couple of days. All right, so let's talk about defining the self. If you remember in social psychology, or actually in chapter 7, we talked about schemas, which is a knowledge structure that helps you organize the information you have in your head, right? And so when we go to, when we talk about the schema, it's a knowledge structure, right? And we talked about that in chapter 7. Okay. And then what I want you to know is a self schema is a knowledge structure about the self. And if you'll remember, and that's chapter 13. And then if you'll remember, I talked about this in chapter 12. I talked about group versus individual identity. And this is the group versus individual qualities of the self. Okay, so what we talked about, when we were talking about memory, I suggested to you that all information is organized in your mind in these knowledge structures we'll call schema. They allow the disparate pieces of information, sensory experiences, ideas, thoughts you have to be organized into patterns that make sense. So when I say fire truck, a certain set of cognitions come to your mind. When I say circus, you think about an elephant and a lion. All right. And so knowledge structures contain information. Now, I suggested to you last chapter, I began this idea of you have a knowledge structure about the self. We'll call it your self-concept. You can call it your self-schema, if you will. Some people will call it your working self-concept. Whatever it is a set of beliefs that you have about yourself. Now, if I asked you to sit down right now, let's say I asked you to do this right here. What if I said, write a knowledge structure about yourself? What are some things that come to mind when you think about yourself? So I think smart, I think funny, I think short. I'm from the Southern. I'm from the Roddenberry family. I actually happen to think that I'm a good athlete and I'm in good shape. I think I like to read books, etc., 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 right? And some of those are the groups that I'm in. I'm a Southerner. I'm in the Roddenberry family. I'm a Wake Tech teacher. These are my group identities, and these are my individual identities. But this, in a sense, is a self schema. I could ask you to do the same thing about yourself. What is your self schema? Now, the things that you commonly write down, okay, are what we might call the working self concept. That's the aspects of you that come to mind first, okay? So there are lots of beliefs you have with a circus, but 4 or 5 of them come to your mind first. Okay, maybe popcorn doesn't come. It comes eventually, but the first 2 or 3 words that come out of your mind when you're thinking about a circus is lions and tigers and lions and tigers and acrobats. Okay, and so those are sort of the working concept of a circus. You have a working self concept, the aspects of yourself that you're currently thinking about. Now, here's the deal. You can think about all kinds of aspects of yourself. I can think about my good qualities, or I can think about my bad qualities, or I can think about all of my qualities. People don't have time to think about all of their qualities, so what they do is they gravitate to a set of them, this working self-concept. And the crazy thing is, even though it may not be true, some people may gravitate to only and focus only on the negative aspects of themselves. And so you can think of your self-esteem sort of as the global evaluation of yourself that comes from the set of beliefs that initially pop up in your head every time you think about yourself. Okay. Now, we talked about dealing with stress and anxiety, cognitive behavioral therapy. We find the negative thought patterns that people have, and then we change them. Self-esteem is just a negative thought pattern, if you will. Now, there's actually a questionnaire. I've got it right over here, and it's the Rosenberg Self-Esteem Scale. 10 questions, and it has been used for the last 70 years as the scientific measurement of self-esteem. So if you go in to see a clinical psychologist and you get evaluated, one of the tests that they might use to measure you is this Rosenberg Self-Esteem Scale. And it measures your general global evaluation of yourself. Now, there are lots of ways to think about the self. You can think about self-esteem versus self-efficacy. You can think about upward versus downward comparison, but self-esteem is one way in which we generally evaluate our sense of self. And this is the Rosenberg Self-Esteem Scale. Now, if you look right below me, this is the same picture as what I was showing you right here. This is a schema of Chris with his parts of his group identity and the parts of his individual identity. Okay. Now, as you can see, this right here is a picture of your self schema. Okay. Now, self-esteem, the global evaluation of yourself. There's this fellow named, your book's going to talk about this. There's this fellow named Mark Leary. You might ask, why do we have self-esteem? What purpose does self-esteem? Why should we feel badly about ourselves? What value does that provide to anybody? This guy named Mark Leary, he used to work at Wake Forest. I saw him give a talk. I think he doesn't, I don't think he works here anymore. He might be retired. He was an older fellow. He suggests that the reason that self-esteem exists is to help us evaluate how well we are fitting into the group. He argues that human beings are by nature a group animal, right? We need each other to survive. Individually, not so strong. But as a group, we can be very devious and cooperative and do things. In order to survive, we need to bond with our primary caregiver. We need the family unit to raise our children. So being a group animal is very important, and it's ingrained into our system. What this guy, Mark Leary, argues is that self-esteem is sort of our global evaluation of how well we are fitting in with our current group. He says, think of it as a gas tank. Okay, when it's high, when you're fitting in well with the group, your gas tank's high, then you don't need to do anything, right? But when he argues that when you're not fitting well in the group, that self-esteem level drops down really low. And what happens when your gas tank goes really low? You have to stop. You have to make a change. And so what he argues is that we can think of self-esteem maybe as sort of this gauge to social inclusion that helps us adjust our behavior. Think of it sort of as a control mechanism, maybe that helps us decide whether or not our current behavior patterns are good or not good. I don't know. Now, another thing you will find is that people's global evaluation tends to be a little more positive than it should be. If you ask 100 people, how attractive are you? Most of those people will say above average. If you ask 100 people how smart they are, most of them will say above average. If you ask a person how funny they are, they will say above average. If you ask 100 people how good a driver they are, most of those people will say above average. You know what this means? Some people are deluded or not telling the truth, because statistically speaking, 50% of us should be below average. But I know each and every one of you out there in YouTube land right now probably thinks you're smarter than average, better looking than average, funnier than average, and a better driver than average. You have what's known as a positive illusion. So it turns out that most people's evaluation of their abilities outstrips their actual abilities. Now you might say, wow, so everybody runs around super duper deluded? Well, a little bit of delusion is actually helpful, because these delusions help us persist in the face of failure, and they give us the courage to initiate things. They give us the courage to initiate things, and they give us the courage to keep going even when things don't turn out exactly as we want. So it's thought of as positive illusion sort of being a helpful way to keep human beings engaged. You know, the weird thing is, when if you ask a clinically diagnosed person, a group of clinically diagnosed people, and a group of people who are not clinically diagnosed as depressed, if you compare a group of depressed with a group of non-depressed people, what you're going to find is that your depressed people tend to have a more accurate view of themselves than do the non-depressed people. Isn't that weird? People who are clinically depressed tend to have a more accurate self-view than people who are not clinically depressed. Now, you've got the better than average effect is one way in which we massage our self-esteem and make ourselves feel good about ourselves. On the other hand, we have this thing called the self-serving bias. Here's the neat thing. On average, people, as a general rule, tend to take more credit for the successes they have and take less credit for the failures that they have. So if I'm in a group project in chemistry in my biology class, and my chemistry group project makes an A, and you ask me how much input I had into it, I'm going to say that I had 50% of the input. I did most of the work for my chemistry group, where we made an A. But then my biology group project, we made a D minus. And if you ask me how much input I had into that project, I'll say, well, I didn't have as much time, so I didn't help as much in that project. So human beings have this nifty technique where we tend to try to take credit for our successes and push away credit for our failures, in a way to manage this self-esteem and this moderately positive illusion that we have about ourself. Now, and then human beings, when we compare ourselves with others, you can compare yourselves with others who are better than you and find the ways in which you can improve yourself, or you can compare yourself with others who are worse than you and just feel good about yourself, right? So if you are in a close romantic relationship, you can look at a couple that's doing better than you and find out how you could improve your relationship even better. Okay. Or you could look at a couple that's always fighting and on the verge of breaking up and just think about how much better you are than those people. Now, it turns out when given the choice, people don't want to upward compare and see how they can improve themselves. People actually prefer, when given the chance, to engage in downward comparison. We love to compare ourselves with others who are worse on whatever the trait of comparison is. So all of these, in a sense, I would argue, are positive illusions that we have about the selves. Remember, they're this self schema, but this self schema is adjusted towards the positive images in our mind, and they allow us to have this inflated sense of self, which gives us a high self-esteem and makes us feel good. It allows us to persist in the face of failure. It allows us to have the nerve to try new and difficult things. And so this sort of sense of self, this cognitive structure that we have in our mind, allows us, sort of provides an adaptive response that helps us engage in a difficult and challenging world. Now, I have seen evidence which would suggest this is not as true, but if you look right down here below me, there's this interesting pattern that you're going to see in self-esteem. Now, I believe this comes from your book, so we're going to treat this as axiomatic and true, although in another developmental psych textbook with different citations, they're going to say this is not as strong a pattern as it's shown. We're going to pretend that we're going to assume that this is the pattern that exists for this class. And what you're going to notice is that your self-esteem will never be higher than it is when you are an 8-year-old kid. It's before you meet true feedback. It's before you have to start integrating with romantic others. It's before that 8th grade teacher gives you a bad grade. It's before those bullies set in on you. It's before pimples and body changes start making you feel weird about yourself, before your voice changes, before you have to get bras, or you start your period. It's before all of this crazy stuff that occurs in life happens. And what you're going to notice is your self-esteem is never as high as it is as a 10-year-old. Now, if you'll notice this pattern, you're going to notice that it drops steeply during the teenage years. I'm sure each and every one of you remember all the humiliations, embarrassments, and difficulties that you had in junior high and high school. They take you down a notch, if you will. And then what's going to happen is throughout the rest of your life, your self-esteem is going to gradually creep up until you get into your, let's say, your late adulthood. So the beginnings of late adulthood in the 60s. So your self-esteem is going to continue to creep up the rest of your life. And then, of course, it tails off at the end. When you get older and you lose mobility and you can't do things on your own, you leave the workforce, people aren't talking to you as much, your self-esteem scores are going to drop. But notice this pattern, and this happens for both males and females. Your self-esteem's highest as a kid, and then it drops in the teenage years and then slowly picks up through the life. And if I have any 30 or 40-year-old students in the class, I'm not sure how old any of you are, but if I have any older students, you're probably going to tell me that you feel more confident about yourself now that you're older. And I found that I felt more confident in my 30s than I was in my 20s. In my 40s, even more confident. Now I feel super confident as a 52-year-old man. And so you're going to see this pattern of self-esteem throughout life. Now, the other interesting pattern, and this is where you will see some disagreement, is whether or not there is a gender difference in self-esteem. And it has been generally accepted until, like I said, I haven't gone back and looked at the new research, but it's been generally accepted that male self-esteem tends to be higher throughout the lifespan than does female self-esteem. And I'm not sure anybody has a great sociological theory as to why this might be the case. Any questions so far? I notice we've still got 7 people on the broadcast. How do you feel about yourself? Do you feel good? Right? Quickly, go back here on this. For these 10 items, select the items that you think are definitely true. If you think it's maybe true, don't select it, but only the ones you think are definitely true. And the stars, never mind. Actually, you can't do that. Never mind. That's not going to work because some of these are backwards score. Lewis Tappy says most of the time he feels good. Fantastic. Okay, cool. You know what? I have to find a way to set that up. Maybe, you know what? I know what I should have done. Dadgummit. Next semester, I'm going to have that scale and I will send it out during the lecture. That would be a great idea. Okay. No problem. All right, so classic approaches to studying personality development. So that's sort of defining, in a sense, that's question number one, defining the self. What exactly do we mean when we're talking about the self? We're talking about this self schema, if you will. And the reason that I have three numbers instead of just two broad approaches is because, as a general rule, your book's going to sort of keep 1 and 3 together. We think about measuring it as the same thing as defining it. But I wanted to kind of touch on those in a little different manner here in class. So the second thing I want to talk about is how does the self or personality develop? Okay. Now, nobody knows. That is an incredibly complex question. Can you imagine trying to say, where does personality develop? That is a large question. It's going to include your genetics, right? It's going to include your diet and environment. It's going to include the experiences that you had. It's going to include the specific sort of learned, the classically conditioned and operant conditioned experience that you have. It's going to be the interaction of all these factors together, figuring out why a person has, why personality develops is probably the most impossible question you could ever study. However, the history of psychology, the history of psychology has always had in it a group of people trying to figure out exactly how personality develops. If you look over here at this chart, table 13.1 in your textbook, what you're going to notice is that there are three broad approaches to describing how personality develops. That's what these are. Three broad theories on how people's personality develops. So if I ask you, Lewis, the loaded question, why are people like they are? Why do people turn out like they are? Your answer would represent your general theory on why people turn out the way they do. These are three broad approaches. The psychodynamic theory was the earliest. It was spearheaded. It was created by a fellow named Sigmund Freud. Don't know if you ever heard the name Sigmund Freud. He actually was the first person to really develop to create a theory of human development. You could actually think of him as a developmental psychologist because he was the first psychologist to provide this full theory that explained how people grew up in their lifetime. Okay, so Sigmund Freud and his group represent the first tradition. Now, then a later approach were called the Humanists, who had a different explanation for how personality developed. And then, as I mentioned to you again, with the rise of the cognitive tradition, you're going to see theories develop with this word cognitive in them. So the social cognitive approach to personality. And basically, these three headings, psychodynamic, humanistic, and social cognitive, represent three broad explanations for why people grow up to be the way they are. And you'll notice in their descriptions right here, they're going to provide a general description of what they mean, and then they're going to provide you with specific theorists or examples of people who had theories in each of these traditions. So the psychodynamic theory is pretty much a very negative theory of personality, and it says that human beings are always in a sense in a state of conflict with their environment. You're not getting enough self-esteem, you're not getting enough power, you're not getting enough love, you're not getting enough sex. You are in conflict with your environment for these basic desires, and this conflict between what you want and what you get creates personality. That's represented by the psychodynamic theory, and we could even talk about Freud and his psychosexual stages, which I'll mention for a minute. So it was sort of a conflict-based theory. On the other hand, the humanistic approach to personality argued that human beings, human personality, just like every other brain and body structure, will grow to be normal unless it's put in an abnormal environment. So according to the humanists, we are all going to grow into adults somewhere between the height of 5'2" and 6'5". We're all going to have 2 arms, 10 fingers, 2 legs, 10 fingers, a head with 2 ears and 2 eyes that can see. The humanists argue that people's personality is born to be just as normal. But sometimes people develop abnormally because of their environment. Maybe there's lead in their environment, or they live near power lines, or sometimes a baby. Remember what we talked about in developmental psychology? You may have a teratogen, some sort of prenatal substance that gets into your body and damages a particular body part. The humanists argue that if we just let people grow normally and take away the poisons, that personality will develop normally. So we will grow through our full potential, so to speak. So we have one theory that says that personality is caused because of the conflicts between what you need and what the world gives you, the psychodynamic theories. And then we have the humanistic theories who say, no, people are, the course of personality is to be normal and to fit in with your environment. And we develop normal personalities unless something bad is happening in the environment. And we could talk about Carl Rogers and his person-centered approach. And then the cognitive approaches basically say that personality is a learned habit. So you get reinforcements or punishments early in your environment, and they teach you that you are a powerful person and can get things done, okay, or that you are a powerless person and you can't get things done. And so the sociocognitive approaches focus more on people's ability to achieve, and they typically focus on personality as something you learn from early experiences in life. So personality is based on how a person thinks. So you learn to be helpless as a child, and that creates a personality style, or you learn to be powerful as a child. And these personality styles affect the way you interpret the world. Remember, I suggested to you that this is nothing but a habit. The things that come to your mind when you're asked to describe yourself is a habit. Notice that all of these that I read, read a book, smart, funny, teacher, good athlete, Southern, and Roddenberry, all of these are positive. I only have one semi-negative thing about myself, short. Now, I have a lot of different things I could think about that are bad about me. I could put bad temper. I could put my farts really stink. I could put any number of negative things here, but I chose to talk about the positive things. According to this sociocognitive approach, they try to explain the mechanism by which we learn the habits of self-reference. What I'm going to do is talk briefly about each one of these 3 approaches. Psychodynamic approach, Sigmund Freud. He thought he was the earliest of the 3 major approaches and older than behaviorism and cognitive psychology. This theory of psychodynamic theory was developed by Sigmund Freud, who was the first rock star psychologist. Now, he treated upscale Victorian women in Europe for his practice, and he began to realize that a lot of these women had underlying subconscious conflicts, embarrassments, sexual embarrassments, uh, uh, greedy embarrassments, and he found that when he talked about these things that these ladies didn't want to talk about, that their symptoms would go away. And what he began to realize was that, and he thought that all of these symptoms could be traced back to the instinctual need for sex. Now, you might think this is ridiculous that personality all relates to sex, but really it kind of makes sense. Think about it. The sex instinct is the most important instinct that we as an organism have. You know, it's as important as the instinct to eat and the instinct to drink water, and the instinct to avoid predators. If we eat, drink, and avoid predators but don't have sex, our organism still dies out. So this instinct is placed into our body, and it is a prime driver of our behavior. Here's the thing, though. We are cognitive creatures. We are smart. We live in a society where we have to control that very strong instinct. And what he argued is that personality, everything we do, is based upon our trying to control that instinct that's in our mind. Okay? And so now here's the deal. We have to control the instinct to eat and the instinct to drink, but nobody really cares when you eat or when you drink, right? I could get a drink right now and none of you would care. I just fulfilled my instinct to drink and none of you cared. Now I can fulfill my instinct to eat right now too. I could eat. Now, could I fulfill my instinct for sexual gratification right now in this class? No, absolutely. I'd get fired and probably arrested for doing it, right? So there are big rules about how we fulfill this instinct. And what he argues is that this conflict between rules and our desires is what creates our personality. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard of the terms id, ego, and superego. Anybody ever heard of those terms before? The id, the ego, and the superego. Those were terms for the personality coined by Sigmund Freud. He argued that our id, which is German for it, was sort of our instinctual desire. You were born with these instincts in your body. Now, he argued over the first 4 or 5 years of our life, our parents shame us for having this instinctual desire. They shame us and shame our goal-directed behavior. They sort of control our instincts to grab things, to eat things, to put things in our mouth, to touch ourselves. They argue that our parents make us feel bad about this, and this creates in us a conscience. Freud called that a superego, okay? And he argued that it really develops powerfully about the time that we develop our first sexual attraction towards our mother. Okay, true, not true, I'm not sure. But he argued that little boys develop a sexual attraction towards our mother. Now, Freud actually was very sexist. He didn't talk too much about female sexuality, but he argued that females went through the same process. They had a sexual attraction towards their father. And he argues that the guilt of this first sexual attraction really creates a conscience. Now, if you look at this picture right underneath me, he argues that your conscience and your desires are below your level of awareness, but they drive you every day. I want to do things, and I'm ashamed about doing things, he said. But what happens is you need a part of your personality to manage these two forces. And he argues this is what develops into our conscious awareness, or our ego. And what our ego does is it's nothing more than a management tool. It tries to manage the desires of our id without getting us in trouble or making us feel bad about ourselves. And he argues that your personality is nothing but a bubbling conflict between your desires and your guilt all day long. And what develops is your personality. Now, he argued, if you ever notice when you go to sleep at night, you dream about important things that are sort of going on in your life in a really weird way.
I remember when I was in high school, my dad wanted me to join the military, but I didn't want to join the military, but I couldn't tell him that. But I used to have these dreams about joining the military, and I would always join the Navy. And since my family's from Charleston, the boat always happened to be leaving out of Charleston. But for some reason, I always got stuck in traffic, or there was a heavy rain, or I couldn't find my shoes or my bag or my car keys, and I always missed the Navy boat heading out to sea. And so I had this dream where I was always going to the Navy but never seemed to get on the boat. In a sense, what Freud would say was I was dreaming of my desire not to join the Navy and of my guilt associated with not wanting to join the Navy and disappointing my father. And so he argued that a lot of times what we do is we live these desires, let them play out in our sleep at night, and this keeps us from going insane. This keeps us psychologically healthy. Now, he argued some people have these problems that are so shameful, so deep, that they can't even just dream them out at night. And he argued that people then use these things called defense mechanisms, where they would lie to themselves to reduce the anxiety of this conflict. I think your book, and here are some of the Freudian defense mechanisms. Oh, I'm so running out of time. I don't know if you've ever heard of something being repressed, of a repressed memory. Anybody ever heard that term before? A repressed memory? Sometimes something bad and traumatic happens that bothers a person so much, what they will do is they will actively forget about it. They will engage in what we call motivated forgetting. And this is known as repression. Now, Sigmund Freud was the first person to realize that people repress memories that cause them anxiety. And he thought that was the root of all personality problems. And then Freud said that we used other strategies to manage this anxiety. Now, the only two that I've got circled here are repression, because he argued before you can do anything else, you have to forget the original memory that bothers you. Repression. And Freud thought that all defense mechanisms, ways for managing this anxiety, were negative, with the exception of one. And he called that sublimation. According to Freud, we do all of the cool things that we do because we are frustrated about sex. Why did you write a book? Because you had extra energy that you had to redirect from your sexual impulse. Why did you build that business? Because you had extra energy that you redirected from your sexual impulses. According to Freud, one of the things that we do with this energy that is caused by the conflict between our superego and our id is sometimes we redirect that energy into something else. That anxiety and energy goes into something else. So this is one theory of how personality develops. I'm not going to say this is the true theory, but Freud has some thought-provoking questions and points to put out there. So this is a psychodynamic theory. And what he argues is that our instincts, personality is based on the conflict between he says, unconscious wishes. Freud said you could call an instinct a wish. If you wanted to talk about an instinct as a thought, instinct and wish are the same thing. So I have the instinct of hunger. I want to eat something. And I say, gee, I wish I had a hamburger. So he argued that personality comes between us trying to manage the conflict between our instinctual desires and the demands of a social world. And like I said, he's the first person to come up with this idea that human beings repress things that make them feel badly about themselves. Okay, I'm out of time, so really I'm not going to be able to talk about much here. Humanistic approach. Just quickly, I'll say Carl Rogers differed because he argued that people are born to grow up normal. There is no need for conflict unless it occurs. He argues that there's this thing called a self-actualizing tendency. Just like your arms grow normally, just like your legs grow normally, your self has a tendency to grow into a normal thing. He called it the self-actualizing tendency. People will have a tendency to develop their what he called their authentic self, your true self, your set of beliefs about who you are, what I want to do as a job, how I feel sexually, how I feel intellectually, how I feel this way and this way. We will all develop a normal, authentic self as long as our world accepts us for who we are. Now, the problem is, he argues that our parents and our friends and everybody has expectations for what they want us to be. Each and every one of you is probably disappointing your mother or father in some little way or some large way. And dads especially, but parents have rules, things they want you to do. And what they do is they give you what's known as conditional positive regard. Mom and dad are only happy if I'm doing well at school. Mom and dad are only happy if I'm doing well on the sports field. Mom and dad are only happy if I brush my teeth and go to bed. Mom and dad are only happy if I eat all of my vegetables at dinner. And so you grow up in a world where you are constantly trying to make your parents happy. And he argues that that is what we would call conditional positive regard. He argues that most human beings need what's known as unconditional positive regard. We need to be accepted for who we are. Now, of course, you need to brush your teeth and eat your vegetables, but if you want to play with dollies and you're a boy, or if you want to play with trucks and you're a female, that should be accepted. But sometimes parents make us feel badly about the things that we like and we find interesting. I might be a boy who likes to read books, but my southern country father thinks that only girls read books. And so every time I want to read a book, he makes me feel bad about that aspect of myself. And what he argues is that if you grow up in a world of unconditional positive regard, what happens is our self, we will develop into two selves, a self of who we are, and then a self of what we think people want us to be. So we'll differentiate into an ideal self and our actual self. And we'll begin showing the world oneself when we are actually this other self. And he argues that this incongruence leads to unhappiness in people's personality. So he argues that everybody's personality is going to grow up normal. The only problem is in our world, everybody makes demands on how we should think, feel, and be. And he argues that if this happens, this creates incongruence in our personality and makes us unhappy. So if we go back quickly, we're done. Psychodynamic theory. Why do people develop the way they are? Well, they're trying to manage the conflict between the instincts that they feel and the world around them. And so that's each one of you. If you have a personality problem and you look at your personality problem, each one of those people is managing some sort of conflict, naturally occurring conflict between their instincts and the world. And that's why they have a personality problem. If you talk to Carl Rogers and the humanists, they would say, well, that person was going to develop normally and authentically, but somebody came in and imposed a set of conditions of worth on them and caused their personality to be twisted. So according to Freud, personality problems would probably be the norm of personality. And according to the humanists, personality problems would be an abnormal condition. I am sorry I ran out of time. I didn't get a chance to talk about the social cognitive approaches. I wish I probably should do 3 hours of lectures a week like I usually do in the classroom, but I know you folks would be bored if I talk that much. I do want to thank everybody for coming for the entire time. It looks like we still have 8 viewers. Fantastic. Did everybody enjoy today's lecture? Please feel free to go out and do the self-esteem scale. I think you will really, really enjoy it and learn something from the Rosenberg self-esteem scale. Tonight in webinar, we're going to be talking about implicit attitudes, and we're going to be testing your implicit attitudes. And I might even give you a personality test as well. Maybe we'll take a personality disorder test. Remember, that's happening tonight at 7 p.m. in Microsoft Teams. I do hope to see you there. If you folks don't have any questions or comments, I'm looking in the chat bar and I don't see anything. I'm going to go ahead and log off because I've got to get to my other class. class, which starts in 5 minutes. You folks good to go? Thank you very much for coming. Have a great day and try to keep cool. Take care. Bye.